Hi, everyone. Ariana Friedlander here with Rosabella Consulting, and welcome to the Co-Creators in Conversation interview series, where we celebrate leaders who are challenging the status quo and creating economic value by genuinely caring about their people. Right now, I am really excited to be speaking with Sharon L'Herrou, President and CEO of 211 Palm Beach and Treasure Coast. Welcome, Sharon. It's wonderful to have you here.
Hi, Ariana. Thank you so much for having me.
So I wonder to start, if you could just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and 211 Palm Beach and Treasure Coast. What do you do there?
Sure, I would love to. So first of all, I want to make sure that for those who aren't familiar with the concept of 211, that all your listeners know that 211 is actually a service that's available throughout the entire U.S. So almost everyone in the U.S. has access to a 211 number.
Wonderful.
Little known because many of us are nonprofits and there's not a lot of dollars for advertising. But the service is there. Ours is a little bit unique in that we provide what all 211s do, which is a helpline service. Meaning that if you are worried about anything going on in your life, from a child that may be having some behavioral challenges, to a parent that may be showing signs of memory loss, to having economic hardships and you can't pay your light bill, any of those things, we have caring staff that will help connect you to whatever services and resources are available in your community.
Wow, that's really comprehensive. And that's across, so it's like 911 for those non-emergency moments, but there is that urgency, that need.
Yes. We have an advocate who says if it's not 911, it's 211. So it's like the 911 or the 411 for social services.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And so I understand that the 211 you run has some more comprehensive offerings than the average organization does across the country. Tell us a little bit more about what is unique about your organization in particular.
Yeah, I would love to. So in addition to the helpline, we also answer, we're the regional responders for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So for people who are feeling who are feeling really desperate, or who are thinking that they may be having thoughts of suicide, they can dial that national lifeline number. And if they do dial that from our service area, they'll be patched directly to our team to respond. So I really love this model, because what it means is that the team that's responding to these requests for help is trained to handle anything from someone who's worried about paying their bills all the way to someone who is really thinking they might not want to wake up in the morning. Wow. And so it means that our staff have a much broader, I like to think, a much broader skill set, right? A deeper level of empathy and care in their ability to handle every single situation that comes to them.
That's amazing, and such an important service, especially as we're seeing increase in mental health issues and things like that, to be able to provide that, and as you said, have staff that are able to exhibit the empathy needed to really support people in need in those moments is so powerful. I wonder if you could tell us, as the leader of this organization, how do you cultivate that skill, that empathy within team members? Because I think that there's other leaders here that would love to learn from you.
Well, I think it's really it's several parts. So I'm thinking about it out loud with you, but
wonderful. That's the best.
I will be honest that I think the first part is screening for that up front. Okay. Because I do want people, we do need a wide variety of skills. We need very skilled personnel, but there are a lot of things that we can teach, but something that, I don't want to say you can't teach, but something that would take longer to teach potentially is caring. So in order to come onto our team, I have to first be confident that you're somebody who at the core, you care about other people.
And how do you evaluate for that?
We do it in conversation. So we have we look at resumes, and then we have a phone screening, but in the resume and in the conversation, usually it will come up organically. And the things that I'm listening for are that they will offer why they want to be here. And they usually tell stories, or they will offer how they had to care for a loved one when they were ill, or that they have a child with a special needs. So they will talk about these things often themselves. But if they don't, I will ask. I will say, so tell me, have you ever, we're a nonprofit, and that's its own special little entity. Have you ever worked for a nonprofit? Do you do any volunteering? So what I'm looking for is, and I even have it, I have it as a note on my little phone screen. What I want to know is, what have you done that demonstrates caretaking behaviors for other people? What have you done? So I want to see that they've done something like that, so that I know that they that's a skill set of theirs.
That's such a great question. And I could see, for our listeners that are in business or government work, there's ways that they could, augment that question.
Right.
To get at that same basic skill of care, concern for others on a team, even if it's not, caretaking, like the way you asked it.
Yeah. When is a time that you collaborated on a project, or tell me about a time when you helped a team member who was struggling to hit a deadline.
Beautiful example. Yeah. And so, okay, so you start by screening, and you look at these stories on the resume, and then you listen in the conversation as you're interviewing them and ask that question. Where do you go from there in terms of cultivating empathy?
Yeah, so I think there are two things. So it starts with screening, and then I think it's expectation setting, and then it's monitoring, right? So with the expectation setting, I mentioned to you when we were prepping for this that we just had a new hire class start. So we have some pre-service training that happens. So the class started, and I like to do a little introduction at all the new hire orientations, because I like to get to know the team, and I talk a little bit about who we are. But I use that opportunity to, one, be very grateful that they're there. I share with people that we've got a rigid, a thorough vetting process. And so if they've made it to that point, we're confident that they're going to be fabulous. They're going to be great additions to the team, and that we're happy to have them. But then I also talk about, we have a code of ethics, and we have a couple of policies that address this. And so I cover them, but I don't cover them. I tell everybody they can read the policies. So I'm not going to read the policy to you.
That's what I always say when working with clients or presenting too. I don't want to insult your intelligence by reading something to you. You can read yourself, which I think is a default a lot of teachers and leaders might lean on, is just the reading the words in front of them, and you miss the richness of the interaction. So you point them to that, but you don't read it to them. Tell me how you bring that into their awareness.
So I like to engage with a dialogue most of the time. So I will usually start with, so if you've had a chance to look at that policy, one is talking about confidentiality, one is a professional code of ethics, and it talks about some of these kinds of things. So tell me, why do you think that that's important? Why is it important to have a policy that says some of these things? Right. So then I get them talking about that. I often try to distill it down. When I summarize, I usually distill it down to something, very specific. So I tend to say that if I could distill it down to one word, it would be respect. So if I could say, if you can treat our callers, our texters, your coworkers, your supervisor, if you treat everyone in your bubble with respect, you can't go wrong. So respect. And then we talk about what we want people who are calling us for help. I'll call them callers, although we do take texts and emails as well. But what do we want the callers to get from the call? And we are trying to help them. So a lot of people will say, help, support, connections to services, whatever it is that person's looking for. And all that is true. But in the real world, you can't help everyone all the time in the moment they want it, or in the way that they are looking for it. So what I say is, we want to do all of those things, certainly. But at the same time, what we most want is that every single person who reaches out to us feels cared about. Every single person should feel cared about when they end their conversation with us. And so I've set the expectation from orientation that that's the goal of what we're doing. And then we do have some monitoring mechanisms, and we actually, of course, our work is a little bit different, you know, given the kind of work, but in the monitoring, we listen into some calls and we will do coaching around it. And one of the things we are looking for is an empathetic tone of voice. And so if someone's struggling with that, we actually will practice with them a little bit, but you know, we'll let them listen to their own call. I say to people, I try to call out really good performance. So I walk by, I hear. So I will say, I'll message people, you know, I don't want to interrupt when they're on a call, but I'll message people and say, you know, you sounded so wonderful with that person. Like if it was my mom, I would want her to talk to you, you know? So that's exactly what I want someone to feel like.
I love the examples you just gave of how you then from the screening process really kind of indoctrinate people. And part of what I appreciate about what you shared are these real solid examples that track with the work we do at Rosabella Consulting, using the neuroscience of conversation. And what we understand from that is the importance of that dialogue, right? Those exploratory conversations, those open questions that get people into their executive brain as you're training them, so that they're really processing and thinking things through at a higher level. And you're activating their abilities to empathize when you do that. I think, you know, that piece is so beautiful and well done. And then the other pieces that I hear, tone of voice is something that we don't talk enough about, right? We know it, and you see it with kids, you know, you see it when a baby is experiencing that someone speaking in a harsh tone of voice, they start to cry, they start to respond to it from fear. And so we are hardwired to react to tone of voice in very visceral ways. And so I think it's really cool that you're mindful of bringing people's attention to that.
We work very hard with that. And then in the when we're monitoring and we're listening, when we are seeing or hearing things that aren't as good, one of the things I touched on quickly is that a strategy is to let the person themselves listen to the call. And so before we start talking to them about what we heard or thought, we usually ask them, you know, after you've listened to the call and you looked at sort of the scoring mechanism, what did you think? You know, what did you think? And usually the person, I mean, very often they will say, I didn't realize I came across like that. You know, that's not how I thought I sounded, and I didn't mean to come across so abrupt. So they usually themselves know without us having to. Although, you know, we do some coaching and practice, but often that's the first step.
And that's one of the benefits of the service that you provide, is that you are recording these calls. And so you can provide that opportunity, that mirroring for them instantly. And, you know, it's interesting, as more organizations are doing hybrid or remote teams, they sometimes are recording calls or meetings. And so, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for listeners that, oh, you could, you know, listen to those recordings from a different vantage point, like listening for how was I showing up in that conversation, and how was I responding to the way other people were showing up? Because it really is powerful. And I found for myself too, when listening to recordings, I was just listening to one actually right before we met of a meeting where I internalized it so differently. And going back and hearing it, I realized, okay, you know, maybe I am shooting the messenger and with the way I'm responding to this person. And this was a personal call. This wasn't work. But, you know, there were things that I had to hear in that conversation that were so hard to hear, that it's easy to turn it on. Well, they delivered that badly.
No, it's so true. And our pre-service training covers what's called active listening. So it's really listening and then sort of paraphrasing or repeating back in an empathetic way. We try to reflect back the feeling that the person is experiencing. And a lot of the staff who go through the training, they tell us, I mean, every single class cycle, people say, wow, I wish I had this class before I got divorced, or, you know, I would have been a better parent if I had this, you know, with my children, or in my last job where I had a difficult coworker, this would have been so helpful. So we find that it's not only great for the specific work that we do, I think that it's very, very healthy for us as human beings. And I think that the healthier we become emotionally, the better choices we can make, the better we engage with others. So I really like the foundation of the work that we do.
I couldn't agree more. And I hear the same thing when I do trainings on conversational intelligence, is how valuable those skills are with their teenager at home, or their partner, or, you know, these other areas where we experience stress in our lives. And when we have the skills to communicate more effectively in those circumstances, we really reduce the stress, that load that we carry over time. And that the other thing that you said in terms of your training that really struck me and really tracks well with what we know through the latest research on neuroscience and conversations is that focus on how people feel. And really being attuned and aware of wanting people to feel like leave a conversation feeling good, and to think, you know, as a leader, it's possible to give constructive feedback and have people leave feeling good about it afterwards.
Right, exactly.
Which kind of is not our norm of how we envision it.
No, it's not at all. And so that is true for us in teaching our staff how to interact with our clients or our callers, but it is also true in teaching peers how to interact with each other, and supervisors how to interact with their subordinates, because we have to give this constructive feedback, and we want it to be healthy, and we want it to be positive. You know, we invest a lot in, that's one of the ways we start often is we've invested a lot in our team members. So we want our team members to continue growing and being healthy and performing well. You know, so we have every interest to just help that person be as successful as they can be.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. And I want to go back to something you shared earlier as well, which is, you know, that you do a lot of different services at your 2-on-1. And so as a leader, I'm curious, like, okay, we talked about the importance of maintaining our mental and emotional well-being. You're overseeing this organization that has to carry quite a heavy load. And it sounds like, you know, across a variety of service areas. So how do you manage all of these different areas of priority and service and maintain your well-being?
Yeah, well, some days it's harder than other days.
Sure.
You know, some days we're in a flow. And when we were talking about the helpline and hotline, I realized after we veered in another direction, I didn't even talk about our auxiliary services, because we actually have quite a few staff that are providing some extra support to vulnerable populations, from special needs children to veterans to elders. So we really are juggling so many things. And because our organization has our fingers sort of on the pulse of what's happening in the community, a lot of our community partners want us at the table. So they want to know the data on the needs and the unmet needs and the referrals that we gave and where they're going and whether or not they were met effectively. So we want to be invited. We want to help those conversations, but juggling all of these pieces is really challenging. As a nonprofit, I think one of the things we're particularly challenged with, and you know, maybe it's true for every business, I just always feel like there's not enough hands. You know, there's just not enough. There's not enough people to do all of the things that are needed, and that's very challenging. So I cope with that. Well, I guess I have the same philosophy for that as I do. I'll tell you a story. I'm always about the story. So my mom worries about me. So she worries about the workload, and she worries about, you know, she doesn't call it mental health, but she's like, she worries about my heart. So I tell her things that are going on, and she says, oh, I would have so much, I would never be able to do that. You know, it would just hurt my heart so much. And I worry about you, you know, doing, you know, carrying this kind of weight. And so I tell her that the way that I frame it is, I have to know, I think in any helping profession, we have to know we cannot help everybody. You have to accept that. We cannot help everybody. So and we want to change the world, but we are not going to change the world tomorrow, right? So what I have to do, what I tell myself is, if my choices are to help no one because I can't get us to a perfect world, or to help the ones I can, I am going to just focus my attention on helping where I can.
Right.
So that's the way that I separate it out. I know that I can't do everything, but I am going to do what I can.
It almost sounds like you're focusing on the strengths or the assets instead of the deficits, right? Instead of saying, well, there's all of these things we should be doing and we're not doing, and like getting worn down from that place. It's focusing on, well, here's what we are doing well, and here's who we can help, and who we are helping.
And from an organizational perspective, the way I do it with our staff, because we have so many things to do, is that I say, so we always have to prioritize, and we have to know, and I tell the team members, and I do this myself, I still take days off, I go away. I mean, when I see new team members working lots and lots of days, I will say, you have to take off, and they explain that they have all of these things that have to get done, and I'm like, yeah, me too. But the problem is, if we waited until our work was done to take a day off, we'd never take a day off. And then we won't have the energy to keep doing this work. So we just have to say, I'm focusing on the priorities I can get done. And then I'm going to take the day off. I'm going to be off this weekend, or I'm going to go, away on a little trip. And then again, that's almost more our daily types of activities, but organizationally, when we're talking about where are we going, what are we going to accomplish, we do some priority setting as well. And when ideas pop up, they may be good ideas, but we can't get to them right now. So what I tend to say is, these are good ideas. I don't want to lose them. So I tend to have mentally a running list of what we're going to do in the next few weeks, what we're going to do, over the year. And then I tend to say down the road. So we may have a long down the road list, but it doesn't mean that it's lost forever. It just means it's a little further down the road.
Right. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense, like categorizing those things in terms of the level of urgency that they have, and doing so intentionally, I think, is one of the things that leaders and employees and everyone really needs to develop. It's like a muscle, I think, learning to prioritize instead of reacting to the fire of the moment.
Right, exactly.
Because it just feels like a fire, but a lot of the times it's not an actual fire.
Right.
And so, that ability to ascertain, to discern, okay, this feels like a fire, but it's a mirage. Well, and the real priority is this.
I think so. And I think that dovetails with a lot of what I, coach our team members to do, even with our funding partners. So there's a power dynamic with funding partners where they're giving funding to do a certain thing, and the team and the staff feel very much like we're required to do A, B, and C. And I always say, well, maybe, but I think it's worth a conversation, right? Yeah. They are partners. They're not the only partner. Right. They are a partner. And if they're asking us for something and it doesn't make sense for us to do that, we have to go back and have a conversation with them about why this does or doesn't make sense and what we may or may not be able to offer. And in fact, a lot of times for us, these conversations are around data. And so we get a lot of requests for data with data questions. And so I tell the staff, sure, they may want this, and this, but they also may not even know what they want. A lot of times people are on a fishing expedition to try to understand a community situation better. And so with those requests, what I've instructed the team to do is you say, here are the data reports we provide. These are already, these are all of the various ways that we have the data available. Not that we're going to suddenly stop, put the brakes on everything that we're doing, create new reports, analyze new data trends, and then churn out a completely new product while we've stalled on all of the other things that we're doing. So I have to remind the team to have the conversation. Not to just, as you said, not to just jump because it feels urgent.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important practice and pattern and habit to build, is instead of just jumping, have the conversation, instead of just appeasing, having the conversation, because that's one of the patterned threat responses that we know shows up in organizational settings. It's like a silent killer, it's like that that scentless gas.
Right.
Because in the moment it seems like, oh, they're such a team player, they're so helpful, they're always saying yes. But then the follow through, maybe it happens right away, maybe it doesn't happen right away, and then there's all of this other fallout that occurs because
Right.
there's competing priorities, other things aren't getting done.
Right.
And so it's so important to, recognize for team members, and for leaders to like hit the pause button. It's so
Right.
easy to want to say yes to a need, or to a rally cry that really pulls at your heartstrings. Like, who
Right.
doesn't want to just
Right.
scream yes and like
Right.
jump in feet first?
Right.
But is that really doing a service?
Yeah, I remind people that we have to think about what we're not doing,
Yeah.
right? So when we're doing this, we're
Yeah.
not doing something else. And sometimes I have to remind the funders about that. And it also comes up when we're asked to do new services. So I've started, because we often get asked to do new things, and
well, and of course, because you perform so well. So you always ask the busy person or the busy organization to do more, right? That's classic.
Thank you. So we get asked to do so many things. And then the theme in our field is that it's not about the money, right? So you can't make it about the money. It's not about the money. You shouldn't, if you're a nonprofit, it shouldn't always come down to the money. So I've had to figure out how to navigate this. And what I've come to is that when there's a community concern, what I've come to is to say, the short answer is always yes. We want to help. The longer answer is, we have to figure out what time frame and what resources are available to be able to help. So let's have a conversation about that. What you're looking for, what you can, what your budget is to help us make it happen. And I really have not gotten much pushback on that when framed that way.
Yep. Yeah. And the framing makes such a difference. And you keep coming back to, let's have a conversation about that. Let's have a conversation about that. And I love to always wrap up interviews by asking people, what does co-creating look like within your organization and among your partners? And so I feel like you've been dancing around that a little bit, and wonder like, okay, so tell us more, what that looks like. What does that give and take? What does that dance look like when you're co-creating? Because it sounds like you're so attuned to the importance of having those conversations to explore new opportunities and to really make sure you're living in alignment with your mission and vision and values.
I really think that we are co-creating all the time, although we haven't used that term explicitly. But within our own team, I believe that we're co-creators every day, because we don't have a very hierarchical organization. It is very much a team-focused organization where I will bring people together and say, we need to do this thing. And I may give direction, let's, like a coach, Susie, can we get you to do this? And Bobby, can you do that? And then, but a lot of times it's, here's the problem, what do we think we need to do? And then we separate it out, who's doing what. But on a larger scale in the community, this happens all of the time. And the way that it often begins is that someone comes to us with a problem, a community concern. So one of them was people that need a substance abuse evaluation where there's a concern of potential abuse or neglect of a child in the home. In order for them to get scheduled into an evaluation, it was taking weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And so a community leadership partner felt like we could streamline that if we created a new way to do it, and created a new scheduling system and brought partners to the table where they had some protected appointments. And they really framed it, but our role in it is that we now have a very interactive role at the hub. But that is a really solid example, I think, of co-creating, where there was a community problem. Someone came to us with an idea. We brought other partners to the table. We mapped out an entirely new solution, which is now incredibly effective. We're now seeing those individuals within 3 days when it took,
oh my gosh,
sometimes
I just
months.
got goosebumps. That's amazing. And that's the power of co-creating too, right? Where it's like you bring these different partners, you bring people with different strengths, with different resources, with different areas of expertise together, and you come up with a solution that's just drastically better.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that framing of it. Drastically better. It is drastically better. I'm gonna text that partner and share that with them.
Yeah, well, and the difference that that must make, you know, in
People's lives.
people's lives.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, that's, you know, there's nothing. I mean, there's a lot of heartbreaking things out there, but to think of a child in an abusive situation longer because of that delay,
Well, and
that's so
that's what I
heartbreaking.
was going to say, the change it makes in people's lives. Another thing that I'm reminded in this work all the time is that every time someone is struggling, it's not only their struggle, it's every single person that they are connected to. So when we help one person with that struggle, there really is an enormous ripple effect
Mm-hmm.
of improvement in people's lives all around.
It's so true. Oh man, this has been so fun speaking with you, Sharon. I feel
I've
like we could
enjoyed
talk
it.
forever. I
Yes.
wonder if our listeners want to get in touch with you and 211 West Palm and Treasure Coast. What's the best way for them to do that?
Well, Google makes it easy. So if you Google if you Google 211 Palm Beach, 211 Palm Beach County, then our website will come up, and
Great.
there are several different buttons there that they can click to email us or chat with us or send a message. So we would love to get feedback from everybody.
Fantastic. And we'll, of course, include the link in the show notes as well
Great.
for everyone. And
Great.
thank you so much for being with us and sharing your story today, Sharon. I'm just learned so much from our conversation. And I imagine our listeners have as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me and giving us the opportunity to share information about this service.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today for this episode of Co-Creators in Conversation. This episode was brought to you by Rosabella Consulting, where we coach empathetic leaders to collaborate effectively. And so you can always learn more about Rosabella Consulting or check out additional episodes of the Co-Creators in Conversation series on rosabellaconsulting.com. And if you can identify just one thing from this conversation that really inspired you, identify an action you can take, an experiment you can take to really apply those insights to your own leadership journey, because that's where growth happens. So thank you again to you, Sharon, and to our listeners for joining us, and be well, everyone. Take care.